Hey everyone, it's Erica with Degree Science, and welcome back to Section 3, Cycles in Nature from our Principles of Ecology chapter. Let's go ahead and get started. By now, you should know we are using the PowerPoint to go through the notes from the interactive notebook. If you do not have an interactive notebook, don't worry, get a pen and paper and follow along with the notes as we go through it in the PowerPoint. You can always pause the PowerPoint if you need to catch up. If you want to keep moving along and master those concepts by using the interactive notebook activities, go ahead and grab those at nittygrittyscience.com, or you can head over to Teachers Pay Teachers and get them from my store, Nitty Gritty Science. Let's go ahead and get started with this section, Cycles in Nature. So we're looking at biogeochemical cycles, and the biogeochemical cycles includes all the matter in the ecosystem. And this matter includes our water, our carbon, our nitrogen, and many other substances. If matter could not be recycled, then ecosystems would quickly run out of these materials that is needed for life. And so in this section, we're going to learn about different cycles of matter. We're going to hit the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen, and the phosphorus cycle. Okay, so we're going to see how matters pass from organisms to another and from one part of the biosphere to another. The water cycle. As we know, water is essential for life, and it is constantly moving between the atmosphere and Earth. To ensure a steady supply, Earth's water has to be recycled. So the water cycle is this process which water moves from the Earth's surface to the atmosphere and back. The processes of evaporation, condensation, and precipitation are going to make up the water cycle. Now, evaporation is when molecules of liquid water absorb the energy mostly from the sunlight, and it evaporates from ocean, lakes, and other surfaces and forms a water vapor or a gas in the atmosphere. Okay, and so into the atmosphere, back into the atmosphere, back into these tiny, tiny little drops of liquid. And this process, where the gas is changing back to tiny, tiny little drops of liquid, and tiny little drops of liquid, and this drops of liquid, and this process, where the gas is changing back to a liquid, is called condensation. And the water droplets collect all around these little tiny particles of dust and particulates, it's called, eventually forming clouds. And when the clouds get too heavy and they have all this water surrounded by all these particles of dust, the drops in the water are going to grow larger. And eventually the drops become too heavy that they need to fall back to Earth as precipitation. Precipitation can include rain, snow, sleet, and hail. And it mostly falls back into the oceans or lakes, but sometimes it falls on the land and it can either soak into the soil. It will eventually become groundwater, or it can run off the land and be a runoff flowing back into rivers and streams and oceans. Now, the carbon cycle is a process that producers and consumers and decomposers all play a role in recycling. Now, producers, we know, are those organisms that make their own food, take in the food themselves. When consumers, such as us, for example, eat that producers or eat those plants, we're going to break down when consumers, such as us, for example, when consumers, such as us, for example, eat that producers or eat those plants, we're going to break down those food molecules to obtain that energy that was in them. And that is going to release carbon dioxide and water as waste products in our own bodies. Okay. And when, let's say, an animal comes along, eats an apple, and as those consumers die, the decomposers are going to break down their remains and return the rest of those carbon compounds to the soil. And then some decomposers also release carbon dioxide, okay? But there is a big human impact that also affect the levels of carbon as well in the atmosphere. For example, when humans burn oil and fossil fuels, carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. Or when humans clear forests for lumber and farmland, the carbon dioxide levels also rise because, as you know, the producers, these plants, as I just said, take in the carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. So when the trees and the plants are removed from the ecosystem, and when there's whole clear cutting and land is cleared and trees are cut down, then there's fewer producers to absorb that carbon dioxide. And the effect is even larger when trees are burned down, because not only are those trees removed during the burn to clear a forest, they can't absorb that carbon dioxide, but the burning process also adds additional carbon dioxide and it is released into the air. Now, the nitrogen cycle is it takes nitrogen and it moves from the air to the soil into living things and then back into the air. And since the air around us is about 78% nitrogen gas, you would think it would be easy for living things to obtain the nitrogen. However, nitrogen usually has to be with another compound for organisms to use it. They just can't use this. It's called free nitrogen because it's not combined with other kinds of atoms. So most organisms can use nitrogen only once it's been fixed or is combined with other elements to form nitrogen containing compounds. And so this process of changing this free nitrogen that can't be used into a usable form of nitrogen is called nitrogen fixation. Okay, and a lot of this is performed by certain kinds of bacteria that live on the roots of plants and that sort of thing. All right. So once the nitrogen has been fixed, now the producers can go ahead and use it to build complex compounds, and the decomposers can also break down these compounds in animal waste and the bodies of dead organisms, and that nitrogen in the soil can go ahead and be recycled back up into the atmosphere. Okay, and then the cycle is going to continually move from there. Now, the phosphorus cycle is a cycle that goes through the land, the ocean, sediments, and then living organisms. All right. It's an element that all organisms need, and it's going to cycle in two ways. First, the plants are going to get it from the soil, and then the animals get the phosphorus from eating those plants. So when the animals die, their decaying bodies release the phosphorus back into the soil to be used again by the plants. Also, phosphorus is also found in rocks. So over time, erosion is going to release phosphorus back into the environment as well to be used by plants and consumers. So those are your 4 cycles that we are going to touch upon. And you have made it through another section of the principles of ecology. So when you are done with this and you have all the notes completed from this PowerPoint, I'd like you to go ahead and check out the interactive notebook activity to go ahead and master those concepts that we just went over. This one is a super fun activity. We are going to be using, or creating, I should say, Mobius strips. And a Mobius strip is going to be a continuous strip. This one has a statement on it, and I'm not going to kind of cycle and glue them in a particular way, so that way you will see it's a continuous strip that is sharing the message for each cycle along, and glue them in a particular way, so that way you will see it's a continuous strip that is sharing the message for each cycle along each strip. So go ahead and master that concept, and when you are ready to go on to your next section of Principles Ecology, I will see you then. Take care.